Well, hello, everyone. Let me add my welcome to Denise's. I'm Janet B. I've recovered from compulsive eating and bulimia. And tonight we are going to, well, I am going to talk about there is a solution. Last week we did Bill's story, which was kind of an overview intro. And now we're going to start talking about there is a solution. So if you have your big book, we are on page 17. Look at the title of that chapter. There is a solution. So, okay, if there's a solution, that means first there's a problem. So what's the problem? The problem, our book tells us, is that we don't have the power to stop binging. And what's the solution? To find a power greater than yourself, God, which will solve your problem. And they say there is a solution. So this book just offers one solution. They're really clear there may be other solutions out there, but they offer one solution. So here we are, page 17. It says, we have Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They've solved the drink problem. Look at the nexus there between being hopeless, realizing we're hopeless, and recovering. How come? How come they're basically saying people who are hopeless recover? And it's because this program, as we'll see later in the chapter, requires self-searching, leveling of our pride, self-sacrifice, being rigorously honest, even when it's hard. We're not going to do that unless we feel hopeless. No one is going to take chemo unless they feel they have, a late stage cancer and that's their only hope. But they say they have solved the drink problem, or rather, the problem has been solved for us. And then they say, we're just like regular run-of-the-mill people. There's all types of political, economic, social backgrounds. Everyone's welcome here. And they say, we're like the passengers of a great liner the moment after shipwreck. So imagine, right, on the Titanic, it goes down, but then we're a group of the people who got saved, who got rescued. It says that binds us together, the feeling of having shared in a common peril. Well, when I went to my first Overeaters Anonymous meeting, I was 15 years old, already a full-fledged compulsive eater. And I felt grateful that here were a bunch of people like me, common peril, right? I felt I'm at home. These people get me. Now I understand that I have the disease of compulsive eating. But it says that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. I was like someone who was on the Titanic and just sunk and went down with the ship. So what good is it to say, yay, we're all on the Titanic going down with the ship? No, no. We are people who've been rescued. And look what it says, bottom of 17. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution, one way to recover, a way out upon which we can absolutely agree. Okay, this book was written by 100 alcoholics. 100 of them absolutely agreed on this one way to recover. And it says, this is the great news this book carries. So the purpose of this book is to tell us precisely what we need to do to recover. So we flip the page. On page 18, it says, an illness of this sort involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can. Okay, most illnesses, aside from like the common cold, require outside intervention, right? Penicillin, insulin, chemotherapy, something. Outside intervention. Usually if we're very sick, we can't get well just because we say, this really stinks that I have pneumonia and I've been sick for 2 weeks. I really want to get better. And then magically we get better. It doesn't happen. So we have to see that this is an illness and a treatment, a solution has to be applied. But first they spend a little time telling us about this illness. It tells us what it brings: misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. But interesting, it says this illness brings all these things. This illness is primary. And these are symptoms. These symptoms are secondary. So we can't just treat the symptom. We have to treat the illness. And they go ahead and they say, Highly competent psychiatrists usually find it difficult, if not impossible, to deal with us. How come? Because they say, who can help us? And they have an italic, so that means, guys, pay attention. The ex-problem drinker or eater who has found the solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic, compulsive eater in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. So this is different than like a patient going to a doctor. And I was really thinking about like, why? How come? And I think one reason is if we're helping people properly, the shame element is gone. You know, if I'm sitting there telling someone about the crazy things I did with food, the horrible way I treated people, she's not going to feel so bad telling me about the crazy things she's done with the food or horrible ways she's treated people. We form an identification. And look what it says. We can generally win the entire confidence in a few hours. That means we're supposed to put in the time. It's not just like take 2 food plans and call me in the morning. We take time getting to know the person, their religious beliefs, how they binged, what their history is. So we put in the time. And then it has the elements of a 12-step call. And they have 9 things here. That the man who's making the approach, 1, has had the same difficulty. So we have an identification. You did that. Yeah, I used to do that too. And I recovered. Maybe I can recover too. What'd you do? So the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he is talking about, that we go through the steps and we have knowledge about what it takes to recover. We have knowledge. 3, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer. Now notice it says his deportment shouts. He doesn't shout. We are not supposed to be shouting at our sponsees and being abusive to our sponsees. But our deportment is supposed to shout that we have an answer. We're not supposed to look like, oh my gosh, I worked this program, but I'm so tired, I can't get out of bed, and my life is so hard and miserable. Like, no, life is good. We have a real solution, right? That he has no attitude of holier than thou. If I'm recovered, all it means is I just got on the bus 1 stop ahead of the next guy. That's it. Nothing special about me. Nothing whatever except the sincere desire to be helpful. We truly want to help. Number 6, no fees to pay. We never take money for this. Number 7, no access to grind. It's not like, let's go after big pharma or big sugar or the alcohol industry. No, we're just people. We say certain foods don't agree with us and we needed help learning how to put them down. No people to please. So if I could say one thing, it is don't lie to your sponsor. Don't say, well, I'm scared to tell my sponsor the truth because she'll drop me. She won't like me. She'll say something bad. We're not in the business of pleasing people. We're here to learn to be in the business of pleasing God. No lectures to be endured. Well, you're all enduring one right now. But the point is that, you know, when we're sitting with our sponsees, we're not supposed to be beating them over the head. And they say, these are the conditions which we have found most effective. So that we have knowledge, we've been through the steps, we know what we're talking about, that we, you know, radiate joy and that we care. Right? Melissa and I always say that really 2 things are needed to foster an environment of recovery, and that's correct information and love. So we try to do that here, and we encourage everyone to do that with their sponsees. Okay, page 19, it says, we don't make a sole vocation of this work. We feel that elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. I do not think that this means that the first thing, the beginning thing, the first thing we have to do is stop drinking or binging. Sometimes people will say, well, you have to put the food down for a certain amount of time before you can work the steps. Well, think about it. Bill Wilson was drunk when Ebby came to him. When Bill went to Dr. Bob was planning on drinking. He only wanted to say 15 minutes so he could go home and drink. But it's not, let's put down the food and then work the steps. Well, so let me explain what I mean, because I absolutely do not mean that we work the steps while we're binging, and that's just fine and dandy. But so here's what happens, or here's what happened to me, and I've seen it replicated. So I was binging right before a meeting, stuffing bagel chips down my throat behind a locked bathroom door, binging. Went to a meeting, said, I need help. I got a sponsor. I said, I'll do whatever you tell me. And then I started working the steps immediately. So you may have been binging right before this meeting, but you're not binging right now. So you can start right now. Now, to start, we need to start accessing power. We need to start accessing the power of God, right? Because I don't have the power to put it down on my own. Here's what I did. I took a very tough sponsor, and the sponsor said, what are you willing to do? And I said, anything you tell me, hoping to God I wasn't told to move an hour and a half away where these good meetings were, because I knew I'd have to do it. And I heard this expression once, Herb K said it, and I think it's beautiful. Willingness allows grace to enter. And I've seen this over and over, that as soon as a person says, I'm willing to go to any lengths, and starts taking action, the obsession just starts going away and they're able to start doing it. So it's not put down the food and then work the steps. It's connect with God as best you can, and then the obsession will go away. So what if we don't believe in God? Um, we'll get into that more later. I'll just tell you what I did. I had always believed in God, but I was a practical agnostic. Like, I believed in God, but it was totally irrelevant to my life. Just as I say, I believe there's a king in England, but it's totally irrelevant to my life. Now, if I lived in the UK, it might be relevant. Um, so I believed in God, but he was irrelevant. And I left that meeting, and in the parking lot, I didn't know it at the time, but I really was surrendering. I said, God, I've always had fixed ideas of what you are like and how to worship you. I'm willing to admit it's all wrong and let you show me what you're like and how to worship you. And I just started doing things that I knew I had to do. And for me, it was like a hand reached in and yanked out the obsession. So it says elimination of our drinking, eating is just the beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies in our respected homes, occupations, and affairs. So they mean it's not good enough to say, well, I'm just not binging if I'm being like a tornado around my house. I have to practice certain principles. What are they? Karen M. once went through the big book and made a list of all the spiritual principles, and it's on our website. So Denise will throw the link in the chat. But basically, honesty, unselfishness, putting the welfare of others first. And they say all of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort which we're going to describe. What does much mean? So to me, it means I subtract the time I have to spend working, taking care of my family, taking care of my own health, like exercising. And then the time I have left over is my spare time. And I should be spending much of it helping others. Basically, if I'm watching as much Netflix as I want to, I'm probably not spending enough of my time helping others. So they say, okay, this is great, helping each other one at a time. But to help more people, they said, we've concluded to publish an anonymous volume setting forth the problem as we see it. And it says, we'll bring to the task our combined experience and knowledge. Both are necessary. A doctor could have knowledge, but not the experience. And it says we're going to have to discuss a lot of things, medical, psychiatric, social, and religion. And we're aware it's controversial. Then at the bottom of 19, and again, this is we can start practicing from hour one. You binged right before this meeting. Here's stuff we can start practicing now. Most of us sense real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints, and a respect for their opinions are attitudes which make us more useful to others. So that means other people do have shortcomings. I'm sure we can all find them right in our own families. but we're supposed to be tolerant of that. That means they don't bother us. And their viewpoints and respect for their opinions. That means Republicans respect Democrats. It means people of one religion respect people of another religion or of no religion. We respect each other. And they say these things make us more useful to others. Okay, why is that so important? So here it is. We have to grow in our ability to have tolerance, to respect other people. As a result, that makes us more useful. And our very lives, top of page 20, as X-problem eaters, depends upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. Basically, that means I have to be useful, right? They're telling me my life depends on being useful. So what are ways to do it? Thinking about other people and what are their needs. So who are the people in my orbit? We are, people in our family, our jobs. What needs do they have? How can I help meet them? How can I be tolerant of their shortcomings? We could start practicing this right away. And why is it so important to be useful? Well, think about what the roots of this illness are. The roots of this illness are selfishness and self-centeredness. Basically, we need a root transplant, right? And instead of being selfish and self-centered, we need to be useful and God-centered. So that's something we can practice. God isn't going to make me take out the trash. He'll give me the power I need to not binge, but he's not going to do something. He's not going to do my dishes for me. And they say, okay, if you're one of us, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. So this is a manual on how to recover from compulsive eating in 12 simple but not always easy steps. And they talk about then 3 different types of drinkers. Now notice they don't say 3 different types of alcoholics. And this was really important to me, and you'll see why in a minute. So it talks about moderate drinkers who could give up liquor or binging if they have a reason for it. A hard drinker where it's worse, but it says, if a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, the warning of a doctor comes about, this person can stop, even though he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. So someone may be not a real compulsive eater, but still find it hard. And it says, but what about the real alcoholic, the real compulsive eater? This person begins to lose all control once he starts to drink or take the first compulsive bite. So here's a few examples. Moderate drinker or eater, my husband. So it was about 20 years ago. The doctor said, you have high blood pressure. You need to lose some weight. So he said, okay. So he just did this thing called cutting back, and he lost all his weight, and it's been 20 years and he still kept the weight off. So if we go on vacation and he comes home and he sees he's put on a few pounds, he'll do this weird thing again, cutting back, and he'll be back to his right weight, no problem. Moderate eater. Hard drinker or hard eater is more progressed. So I think of 2 examples. One is my friend Elle. Her husband saw if he had even 1 glass of alcohol, he couldn't stop. So he said, okay, I'm just never again going to have a glass of alcohol. And he didn't. He was a hard drinker. He had the allergy of the body, which made him crave it, but not the obsession of the mind. And this may be why there are some people in Overeaters Anonymous who can get better just by the structure and support, by calling in their food, by doing assignments, by committing to a certain number of meetings. They need the structure and support. Okay, for 6.5 years, I tried all that structure and support. I went to meetings, I made the phone calls, I called in my food every morning. I did all this stuff, all the structure and support. It didn't work because a real alcoholic or a real compulsive eater needs a miracle. And a miracle isn't found in structure and support. Structure and support help us to be in a position where we can receive the miracle, but only God can give it to us. So they go ahead and they talk about the real alcoholic. loses all control once he takes the first compulsive bite. And so then the question is, well, why take the first compulsive bite? But that's really what defines an addict. So page 22, they say, why does he behave like this? If hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drink means another debacle with all its attendant suffering and humiliation, why does he take that one drink? Where's his common sense and willpower? That's what we all want to know, right? Why? Why am I like this? So here's what they say. Perhaps there will never be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably. We don't know. We can't answer the riddle. So why do we all want to know how we became compulsive eaters? Well, if you're anything like me, you want to know so you know who you can blame. Probably your parents, right? No, they say no. And later on in one of the stories that it says, we didn't become compulsive eaters because of what happened in our life. We became, or it says alcoholics, because of how we reacted to what happened in our lives. So it's not because of our parents. And by the way, when we get to our fourth steps and our fifth steps, we have to forgive them and we have to forgive anyone else. So they say, okay, we don't know why we have it. I mean, we're like people who we were cucumbers and now we're pickles. We're never going to be cucumbers again. That's just the way it is. So they go back and they talk about, then they bounce back to the person who has one drink and can't stop and, goes on this terrible cycle. And they say these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion, right? My friend Elle's husband, he has that allergy of the body. If he has one, he craves more and more and can't stop, but he never has one. So it's academic. It doesn't matter to him what happens. So, but if that's not us, it says, therefore, the main problem, so the number one problem of the alcoholic, the compulsive eater, centers in his mind rather than his body. So they're saying the allergy is not, if you can't just cure this or solve this on the allergy level. The problem centers in our mind. But remember on page 64, it says once the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. So the order of recovery is like spirit, then mind and body. Okay, so they go ahead and they say people wait, for the day that the guy's going to be able to stop. It says there is the obsession that somehow, someday they will beat the game, but they often suspect they are down for the count. Well, isn't that all of us? Someday, tomorrow, 8 hours with my head on the magic pillow, and I'm going to wake up with power that I never had before. Someday we're going to beat the game. It says, but deep down, when we get really honest, we think, I really can't. And that was me when I hit my bottom. I said, tomorrow is going to be just like today, and the day after is going to be just like that. I'm like a runaway train with no brakes, and there is nothing I can do about it. And then they say the tragic truth is that if the person's a real alcoholic, real compulsive eater, the happy day when he or she can just stop may not arise. He has lost control. Top of page 24. I think this is a really important line. It says, at a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. The problem isn't lack of desire, it's lack of power. Sometimes I'll talk to someone and say, what are you not willing to do? And sometimes people say, well, I'm not willing to put down the food. And I say, really? Is it that you're not willing or that you can't? Like if your fairy godmother came and said, I'll grant you a wish and I can remove the food obsession forever, what would you say? They always say, yeah, except one person. One person actually said, no, I really do not want to put down the food. But we're not here for that person. But the person who says, yes, I want to stop, I have a desire to stop, I just don't know how. Those are the people we are here for and who we have an answer for. And the solution is not just desire. I'm sure people said about me for my first 6.5 years, she must not really want to recover. I wanted to, I had the desire. I didn't know how. And then that big italicized paragraph. The fact is, most alcoholics, compulsive eaters, for reasons yet obscure, so again, we don't know why, have lost the power of choice in drink with food. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink, the first compulsive bite. So they say, okay, my defense is my memory of the suffering and humiliation of my last binge, but I can't bring it into my consciousness. How does that work? And for those of you who've heard my broken bridge a few times, you can go get a drink for about 5 minutes. So normally our defense against doing something dangerous is our memory. So I'll give you a couple examples. I grew up in Florida, in Miami, going to the beach. I got my share of sunburns. So now when I'm out in the sun, I am scrupulous about putting on sunscreen. Why? Because stored in my memory are all these data points. You went to the beach and you didn't put sunscreen on, you got a horrible burn. You didn't put sunscreen on and your face started peeling. You didn't put sunscreen on, and this was the worst of all. The next day, all your wrinkles were showing. So there I go, about to go in the sun. I don't really need sunscreen. I don't want to take the 2 minutes to put it on. My memory grabs all those data points, generates a thought to run across the bridge to my conscious mind. Danger, if you don't put on sunscreen, you're going to get a sunburn and all those wrinkles are going to show. So I put on my sunscreen. Or another example for me is I am very allergic to cats. So I've gone near cats, got an asthma attack, got a sinus infection. My eyes get all red. I start sneezing. I can't breathe. It's really pretty bad. So if someone invites me to her house, I always ask, almost always ask, do you have a cat? And if she says yes, immediately my memory will scan the data points. You were near a cat, you had an asthma attack. You were near a cat, you got a sinus infection. You were near a cat, you got really sick. Generates a thought to run across the bridge to my conscious mind saying, stop, danger, cats will give you an asthma attack. So I tell my friend, I'm really sorry, I can't go to your house. And then let's go to food. So you would think the same mechanism would work. So there I was in college, and I'd leave my dorm, and right down the block was a Dwayne Reed drugstore where I would buy the same cookies. It would come in a box of 20, and I would tell myself, I'm just going to have one or two. We all know how that story ended every time. I'd eat the whole box, sometimes back to the Dwayne Reed for a second box, make myself throw up, not able to get out of bed the next day. So here I go, just let's say one Thursday night, about to buy my box of cookies to just have one or two. And my memory does its job, right? It scans the data points. You said you're going to have one or two, and you did. You had two boxes. You said you're going to have one or two. You ate the whole box of 20 and made yourself throw up. You said you were going to have one or two, ate the whole box, couldn't get out of bed the next day. Don't do it. Danger. Except unlike with sunscreen and cats, the bridge was broken and the thought couldn't get across. My memory failed to keep me in check. I had no defense against the first compulsive bite. And by the way, sometimes what it is, the thought is, I'm just going to eat. I don't care. And we forget all the other times how we woke up the next day and we really did care. Okay, so those of you got your coffee or whatever to miss the bridge again, I'm done. You can come back. So here we are. It says there's a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove. We forget. The memory of the pain doesn't get across. And then the bottom of page 24, it says, when this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies. So let's say someone has the physical allergy, right? A person could have a physical allergy and then stop if they don't have the mental obsession. But once they have that broken bridge, Look what it says, may die or go permanently insane beyond human aid. These stark and ugly facts have been confirmed by legions. That means many, many alcoholics throughout history. Death, insanity, being locked up. And then the top of page 25. But for the grace of God, that's the solution. The grace of God. There would have been thousands more convincing demonstrations. What is grace? It just means unmerited favor. And who gives out this grace? God. Now, obviously, people say it's God as you understand him. Absolutely true. But if this God gives out grace, this God is not a doorknob. I think we can all agree this God is not a doorknob or a tree. A tree and beautiful things in nature may point us to God, but nature can't dispense unmerited favor, grace, healing. Only God can do that. But for the grace of God, we all would be part of those convincing demonstrations. And then they say there is a solution. So this is really how can we access the grace of God? Almost none of us like self-searching, leveling our pride, confession of shortcomings, which this process required. It says, but we saw it worked in others, right? Remember, it says our whole deportment shouts that we have a real answer. We did this and it worked. And we saw that our own lives were futile. So it says, when we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, look at the passive voice there. I didn't solve my problem. It was solved for me by the grace of God. There was nothing left for us because I was hopeless, but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. What are spiritual tools? Honesty, putting the welfare of others ahead of myself, um, doing God's will as best I know. And then what's the result? Does it say, and we stop drinking? It doesn't say that. It says, we have found much of heaven and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. Like I said, removing the food obsession is just like God's opening act. Look how they describe it. Much of heaven, like here on earth, we find much of heaven rocketed into a fourth dimension. And Bill talks about that in his story on page 8. Progressive happiness, peace, and usefulness. That's more and more progressive as time passes. A world that we hadn't even dreamed of. And then it says, the great fact is just this and nothing less. And it doesn't say we stop drinking. This is what we should settle for, nothing less than this. We have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized. I love that word. I have tickets for Les Mis later this summer. I think of like the revolution, where you try and change the status quo, change the order of things. Okay, in that revolution, they lost, but in this revolution, it's God's revolution and he wins. Revolutionizes us, our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and towards God's universe. The central fact of our lives today. So here's kind of what we hold to be the most important thing. The absolute certainty that our Creator, our loving Creator, has entered into our hearts and lives, or entered into our hearts and lives, both work, in a way which is indeed miraculous, not explainable. Okay? He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. Stop binging. But look what else he does. Has a revolution, changes us, right? The way we think about life, like our purpose. I don't know if y'all were like me. I used to say, why am I here? What's my purpose? What's my purpose? Well, like this program has given me a sense of purpose. And then they say, okay, if you're a seriously alcoholic, compulsive eater as we were, there is no middle of the road solution, right? So it's like door number 1 and door number 2. If you've passed through the region through which there's no return through human aid. So some people can get better through Weight Watchers, through willpower, that's fine. But if that's not us, it says we have 2 alternatives. Door number 1, blot out. Keep binging to blot out the pain. And door number 2, accept spiritual help. That's it. Notice door number 2 doesn't say do this, that, the other. It says accept spiritual help. That there's a God who's going to help us, going to rescue us. And the way I always think of it is like, again, I said I grew up in Florida, went through a lot of hurricanes. So if there's a hurricane, and let's say it got really bad, so it was flooding, and the floods were kind of coming up really high, and the sheriffs are coming by with a bullhorn saying, "Get to the roof so that the helicopter can rescue you." Well, we can't just say, "No, you pick me up at my front door. We'll drown." So we've got to, I'm going to be really corny here, climb the 12 steps up to the roof. And so we can be rescued. We're not going to be arrogant and say that we rescued ourselves. All we did is put ourselves in a position so that we could be rescued. Okay, and then, so page 26, they talk about this guy. If Harlan was here, he would probably know his name. I don't know his name. We'll call him a certain American businessman. And he couldn't stop drinking. So he went to see the psychiatrist, Dr. Young, and he wished above all things to regain self-control, but he couldn't. And so the doctor said, "You're hopeless. If you want to live in society, you need to hire a bodyguard." Can you imagine that? Having to hire a bodyguard to follow us around to make sure we didn't eat compulsively. But people like us, we're so sneaky, we could lose that bodyguard and, find a Haagen-Dazs. But that's what he was told. You're going to have to either lock yourself up or hire a bodyguard if you're going to live long. But now this man lives, and it says more than that. He's free. He doesn't have a bodyguard. He's not locked up. All he has to do is maintain a certain simple attitude. Well, what's that attitude, right? Surrender to God, clean house, help others, right? It's really simple. Simple in theory, not easy to do. So this guy, before he recovered, said to Dr. Young, "Is there anything I can do?" And the doctor said, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have never seen one single case recover when a person was like you, zero recovery." Imagine having an illness, right? And being told 0 people have recovered from this, 0. I mean, that would be really scary. And the guy said, "Is there an exception?" And the doctor says, "There is. Exceptions have been occurring like since the beginning of time." Well, of course, since God's been there since the beginning of time. Every once in a while, alcoholics have had vital spiritual experiences. He says, "To me, these occurrences are phenomena. That's like something extraordinary, something that a doctor can't manufacture, that a doctor can't bring about." And here he describes it again, ways to describe a spiritual experience. Huge emotional displacements and rearrangements, an internal revolution, ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding force. I don't know about you, but my ideas, emotions, and attitudes were all, how can I get what I want, when I want, and who cares who I help? It says, that's changed. That's suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. We can be dominated by our good motives, by our good conceptions. And the doctor says, "I've been trying to produce this emotional rearrangement with you, but I've never been successful with an alcoholic of your description." But of course, because only the power of God can do a rearrangement in somebody's soul. A psychiatrist could help us in our minds and our personalities, but not in our soul. And so this guy says, "Well, I go to church, that'll help." And the doctor says, "Yeah, no, that doesn't do it. Just because you're a churchman, it doesn't do it." And it says here, page 28, here was a terrible dilemma our friend found himself in when he had that extraordinary experience, which changed him. He basically encountered God. I mean, that's really what they're talking about. Later on in the later editions, they talk about a spiritual awakening, which happens more slowly. It's like oh, I'm different. I didn't realize it. But early on, they had like, boom, white light spiritual experiences. And then it says us. What do? We sought the same escape with all the desperation of drowning men. So think about it. If we're drowning, right? And it says what seemed at first a flimsy reed has proved to be the loving and powerful hand of God. If someone is drowning and all that's in the ocean is this flimsy reed, we're going to grab it because there's no other options. So here's a way to grab a flimsy reed. Okay, like, well, don't know if there's a God or not. Here's a prayer that might help. Um, Dear God, I don't know if you exist. And if you exist, I don't know if you care about me. But if you do exist and you do care, please help me. The worst thing that could happen, right, if you do that, is there's no God and you're talking to dead air. Okay, so what? You've wasted like a minute of your life. But I believe a prayer like that gets heard by the God who does exist and sets things in motion. And I think after we say that prayer, if we mean it, and we start, and here's how we know if we mean it, we start living the way that we think God, if he existed, right? He may not, but if he did, what would he want of me? And we know certain things. I mean, we may not know what church he wants us to go to, but that's not what they're talking about. We know he wants us to be honest. We know he wants us to help other people. We know he wants us, if we've hurt people in the past, to go back and fix it. Things like we know that he would want us to be kind. We can start like that. I wasn't even kind. I mean, that was like basic for me. I had to just be kind. And it says, then we find this flimsy reed is the loving and powerful hand of God. Well, look at that. They give us two clues about God right here. He's loving and he's powerful. He loves us and he's strong enough to save us. And it looks like a flimsy reed. So for me, what that means is I take one step toward God and he runs 5 football fields toward me. And it says, a new life has been giving us a design for living, which we can all start practicing. And it says, there's many ways which men have discovered God. It says, we have no desire to convince anyone that there is only one way by which faith can be acquired, but it must be acquired, right? We can't just skip over this and say, well, I don't care. We can't skip over the God part. But this is what it says. It says, if what we've learned and felt and seen means anything, it means this is what they've learned. All of us, whatever our race, creed, or color, are the children of a living creator. Living, he's alive, creator. He created us and he continues to recreate us, with whom we may form a relationship, not just a belief. God doesn't want me to just believe in him. He wants to have a relationship with me, with us. And how does he do it? Simple and understandable terms, as soon as we're willing and honest enough to try. And on page 46, they talk about when we try, when we're willing, we get results. And they say, if you have a religious belief or a lack of religious belief, nothing here is going to be offensive. There's no friction about us. And they basically say, we could care less what church, synagogue, mosque you go to. They say, we don't care. It's none of our business. And then they just kind of sum it up. They say, in the following chapter, bottom of page 28 here, there appears an explanation of alcoholism as we understand it, then a chapter addressed to the agnostic. Many who once were in this class are now among our members. Look how they say it, many who once were in this class, because you may start out an agnostic, but if you really sincerely work this program, they're saying you're not going to stay an agnostic. And it says, surprisingly, we find such convictions, not being sure there's God, no great obstacle to a spiritual experience. And they say, then we're going to give you clear-cut directions showing how we recovered. And these are followed by stories. And this is what the stories do. Not just experience, strength, and hope. Each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. So when we tell our stories, right, in the 20 minutes or however long we get, that's what we should focus on. How did I form my relationship with God? Um, and they finish and they just say, we hope that many alcoholic men and women, compulsive eater men and women, desperately in need, that's our audience, the people who are desperate, will see these pages. And we believe only by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems, they will be persuaded to say, yes, I'm one of them too. I must have this thing. So the goal of sharing is so others will identify and want this thing. And what is this thing? A relationship with God, the kind of relationship where we surrender to Him so that He can have His way in us and do that like renovation job in our hearts. And with that, I will pass. Thank you.